Last year, it was TCU. This year, it's a good chance that it's someone new. Who's the dark horse? Who's the team that nobody expects to win this whole league? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll here from ESPN Central Texas Radio. Thank you for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. And it's the guy. We are being treated today by maybe the most recent contracted employee at ESPN in Pete Sousa. Before we get into this podcast and going into the Big 12, which Pete covers so closely, number one, Pete, I want to thank you for being here. Two, I want to congratulate you on your contract. And three, I want to encourage everybody to search Pete, to search Pete's story, the podcast work that he does, the work in media, and your ascension in the last decade to where you are now. And even this week, in that being culminated with an ESPN contract. We're going to hear a lot of you on ESPN as we did last year and even more this year in the Big 12. And I, for one, and everybody else, I'm sure we're excited for it.
Well, thank you very much. I've learned I'm not good with compliments. You just got to kind of hang in there. I grew up with two older brothers, and compliments were thrown around like manhole covers, as they used to say. You didn't get a lot of them, but my mom took care of that part. But I appreciate it, dude. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to call games. It's been a dream of mine, and to do it at a more consistent level this year on the greatest sports network in the world is something that I don't take lightly. There's a responsibility as far as the Big 12 is concerned. It's probably the deepest football conference in the country and the best basketball conference in the country, if you were to ask me. And to be a part of that is very special. And it's sports, it's fun, but I do take that very seriously. It's great to be a part of a podcast like this, Locked On Big 12, and to be a part of the Big 12.
Pete, it's good to have you here. And it's good to know that your voice will be one of the many that cover Big 12 this season on ESPN. And you're going to get a front row seat to the best and the worst this conference has to offer in football. And I want to start with some of those teams that people think will be that worst. The bottom dweller last year was supposed to be TCU. They were 10th in my preseason rankings. Shows what analysts know across the country in the preseason.
What about the bottom dweller the year before that? Who was that?
Kansas? Was it Kansas?
Well, it was Baylor, pretty much. Yeah. So twice in a row, and again, I think that highlights the depth in this conference. Twice in a row, we've had schools that were picked to finish near the bottom, ascend to the top. And although TCU didn't win the Big 12 championship, they went to the championship. And obviously the cream of the crop as far as the conference when the dust finally settled. So I think that goes back to my first statement about just the depth of this conference. And now you add more teams. You got a team like BYU that's expected to finish towards the bottom portion of the conference this year. So I think that gives you an idea of what we're working with here as a product.
Yeah, you say BYU, and there's UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston. And let's put the focus there to start before we go into dark horses from that hateful eight, the leftover teams from Texas and Oklahoma's departure. Pete, of these new four, who is that? None of them are getting any recognition as far as winning the Big 12 or being even really competitive in this league this year. Which one is primed for an early start?
I think BYU. I mean, without looking at their schedule right now, I look at the absolute program itself, the tradition that it brings. This is a program that's used to competing with the best schools in the country out of conference. You look at them competing with Baylor, beating Baylor last year in one of their non-conference games. They've never run from non-conference foes. In conference, in the past, it's been nothing like the Big 12. So we will learn a lot about BYU this year. But again, a lot of experts, so-called, I have them, and people who know more than me, but they have them ranked towards the bottom going into the season. And I think that BYU is a school to keep an eye on. I think that we're still talking about the new schools here, but I think also UCF is a school that with Gus Malzahn, they continue to grow and find their groove and rhythm underneath an incredible coach like that. They got a great quarterback coming in. So I think also UCF, I think there's going to be a little bit of a sticker shock deal for those schools. You end up playing at West Virginia a road game at night, I think it's going to be really different for some of these teams coming into the Big 12. That's an environment like they've not seen, at least with frequency. And I think that there'll be a little bit of sticker shock for them. But then at the same time, too, I think Big 12 fans, who we've been surrounded by these tradition-rich programs for so long, I think that there'll be a little bit, okay, like BYU's for real. That's a really good football program year in and year out. Of course, some off years, but they will compete. And I think it's going to be really fun to see who out of that new group is able to compete.
You got 4 squads that have had recent football success. You're bringing in teams that have won at the highest level of the NCAA within the last 5-10 years.
I didn't even mention Cincinnati, right? I mean, that's a school that was in the playoff 2 years ago. So, and I think that is a real feather. And Brett Yormark will tell you, he inherited that. That was Bob Bowlesby, and he inherited that transition of these new schools. But then you see the work that Brett Yormark has done, and now you see, wow, they're in 10 states. 90 million people is the footprint that the Big 12 is able to touch now. It's amazing. All 4 time zones. It is a great time to be a part of the Big 12, especially this football season. Colorado are not a member yet, but on September 2nd, TCU and Colorado are going to play in one of the most anticipated games in the first month or 2 months of the season. That's going to be week 1, whether you're in it for the hype or it's still going to be a major, and that game's on Fox, right? Which is part of the Big 12 contract going forward. There is no doubt that it is a great time, like I said, to be a part of the Big 12 and to have a front row seat like you and I have.
I think every new team would agree, all these 4 at least, that being in the Big 12 and being in the Big 12 now is huge. To an extent that Texas and Oklahoma, you get the paycheck, but at what cost to your student athletes? At what cost to your fan base when it comes to being competitive in the SEC? So, while I do believe that for an Oklahoma fan, you're probably thinking, wow, this is when we chose. This is when we chose to leave. And of course, if you're a Houston fan, you're happy to be here. Now, if you're one of the, again, they've been dubbed the Hateful Eight, your Baylors and Oklahoma State and TCU, of those teams, there are a couple you circle, like in Oklahoma State, Iowa State, West Virginia, who have been pushed toward the bottom by a lot of national media members. Which of these guys has a shot to be impressive beyond what their expectation is?
Well, Oklahoma State, I feel like you can't count Mike Gundy out. Now you've got him expected to finish in the bottom half of the conference. I just don't see that happen. Ollie Gordon is an exceptional talent. An exceptional runner. I had a chance to see him firsthand last year doing an Oklahoma State game early in the season. And that was a guy, that's why we're lucky enough in Central Texas to have Dominic Richardson. I mean, because he was not going to get the carries that he wanted, right? And Baylor became a better fit. Oklahoma State, just such a tough place to play, such a great coach. And now there's so much about these teams now in the offseason. I mean, you look at the basketball situation, for instance. Kansas State, I mean, they'll have a whole new roster this year, but they had a whole new roster last year. So we go into these situations thinking that we know these teams and what they're made up of, and we're really not so sure. Texas, I love the fact that they returned 5 offensive linemen. That is something that where you're like, woof, you're kind of clutching your pearls if you're an opponent, because, again, we get these rosters, they reshuffle the deck, that they reload talent-wise, but at the same time, there's not a lot of cohesion. So I think when you have the talent and the chemistry that Texas has, Quentin Ewers coming back, Xavier Worthy, you're like, wow, this is a team that once again, though, you're like, okay, sure, Texas looks great on paper.
We've said this a lot, Pete. Every year we say this.
I know I see the wheels moving up there, and you're very kind to me as a guest, but I do like that offensive line. That's something that Baylor's going to lack this year. They have talent coming in on the offensive line, but nobody's played together at all. Right. Everybody's happy right now on the Baylor roster and around the Big 12, because it's like, okay, hey, we're in camp, it's exciting, but things over the next week or so, even when starters get announced, you find out who'll travel. All of a sudden now, how does your team respond to this tension, right? And a little adversity. I think even going into the season, you know a lot about your team, these coaches do. But that's a long way to answer your question. I like Oklahoma State being one of the Hateful Eight.
Pete, I love it. And what you mentioned is continuity. there's continuity with an offensive line, especially. That's where you look for Baylor in 2021, a Big 12 championship Sugar Bowl win. It was the offensive line's dominance. And there's continuity or a lack of continuity now in college football with expansion. You have everything thrown for a loop. And I want to go there next with how expansion could have ruined the college game day experience here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Pete's not going anywhere, and neither am I, because my car won't work. And I know what you're saying. You're like, oh, what do you mean your car won't work? Doesn't your car always have trouble? And it does. It does. But right now, I ordered them today, so they'll come in tomorrow. They will come in tomorrow, parts from eBay Motors. Turns out I have a belt or a whistle or a something or this or that just isn't right. And my intern who I hired from LinkedIn Talent Solutions is not on hand to help me. So what am I supposed to do? Well, eBay Motors, they've got the right parts that you need, right? You got to head to eBay Motors when you want the perfect fit. Every team needs a perfect fit. You need a perfect fit for your vehicle. You tell them my garage what car you have, and they bring it to you. If it doesn't fit, you get your money back. They have 122 million parts. I can't even count that high. It is easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay. Guaranteed fit, only available in the United States. Eligible items only, and keep in mind that exclusions do apply. All right, Pete, college game day experience. There's the luster of your Arizona playing Arizona State. We talked about that. There's the luster of having a Baylor and TCU, of having an Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. And that's the matchup I want to key on. Those games that are gone from the college football experience, from a fan standpoint, from a broadcaster standpoint. Is college football being ruined by expansion? Because so many folks have made that case.
Not at all. College football broadcasts and broadcasters, again, it is such a luxury and an opportunity to call these games, these magnificent environments, these magnificent athletes. They don't change, right? You know that there's 45,000 strong at Texas Tech this September going crazy. And you know that when they play Texas, they'll be bloodthirsty, right? Yep. So you have, and I'm not even sure. I want to make sure. I don't even know that they're on their schedule in Lubbock. But you get the idea. Yeah, I'm not looking at the schedule right now, but you get the idea. So for a broadcaster, those environments, we still get to bring those to the audience at home. We still, that energy, we don't have to really do anything with that because it comes through your television screen. Now, as a fan, that's a whole nother walk of life and a whole nother ball of wax. It is frustrating because you grow up with these rivalries. It's romantic. Yeah. It's exciting. It's what you know. I mean, as a kid from Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, and I'm going to date myself here, but like the Friday after Thanksgiving, to watch Nebraska and Oklahoma play, and to see Jamal Holloway throw to Keith Jackson down the field on the road in Lincoln, and to quiet that stadium, and it was just amazing to be like, wow, there's something happening here on my television screen that's bigger than me. These rivalries and they're bigger than the players. So from a school perspective and an alumni perspective, I really can't speak to that in a sense. As a fan, I know how that impacted me. Mm-hmm. As an alumni, I think as a fan, it is different, right? You get these players on campus, you really don't get a chance to get to know them. You know, we talked about Dominic Richardson. You know, he's been so impactful at Oklahoma State, but now he's playing at Baylor, and it is kind of weird because in conference now, you know, Mike Gundy. Derek Mason was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State last year. He leaves. Joe Bob Cooter's there now. So you kind of have like, okay, this is different. Like now you're going against your old teammate if you're Oklahoma State. That's I've talked to coaches in the Big 12 on the basketball side where that's weird. You know, a guy that you recruited and spent all this time with, you were in his home, and now he's playing at his school. You're going to play him twice a year? Yep. And so I think from so many different perspectives, from a fan, from an alumni, as a broadcaster, it can be different, or as a coach, it can be different. But as a fan, you mentioned Dominic Richardson. Well, I called a game last year in Stillwater where I was so prepped on Dominic Richardson. I know he's a guy that can carry the load. He's a grown man at a young age. He really is beyond his years physically. I know that guy. It's like free agency in football. I love Dominic Richardson in his game. I know who he is, so it doesn't affect me too much. And the energy and what college football is and the pageantry, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Pete, you really wrapped it up in a bow, and I'm not sure you realized it, by bringing up Oklahoma, Nebraska, because we haven't seen Oklahoma play Nebraska in over a decade, and college football has not been ruined. It's still here, and there's still the pageantry. There is still the lights and the sounds and the crowd. You mentioned the crowd comes through the screen. Is that just a case? This another round of realignment, right? The Southwest Conference fell apart. The Big 12 was realigned a couple of times. Is this just another case of NCAA football adjusting but not losing its magic?
Well, yeah, it's never going to lose its magic, as far as I'm concerned. Even if we whittle it down to just a couple conferences, I don't see it losing its magic in my lifetime. I do not, especially football, because the way that you look at it is athletes really – there is a freshman can't leave college football and go right into the NFL. Now, one, because there's rules, but two, because physically you really just can't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit of it's a real roll of the dice. There are certain guys, right, who break the mold. It goes all the way back to when I was a kid, like Moses Malone goes to play in the NBA, doesn't play in college right from high school. Now, I can happily say that was even before my time. But when Moses did that, people were like, oh my gosh, there's going to be guys who do that in college football or who are capable of that. But overall, these guys need a place to play. And right now, the NCAA, and whether you whittle it down to a couple silos and huge conferences, it's always going to be there. The magic is always going to be there. And because we got guys like Brett Yormark who are finding ways to navigate. I mean, the way the Big 12, who would have thought that the Big 12 could come out looking better after Texas and Oklahoma leave? I mean, there's arguments to be made there, but you really could say, wow, this conference is still stacked when you look at basketball and football. So I think you have innovators and disruptors that are still around college football that are going on the positive side, who are going to make sure, because at the end of the day, Drake, there's a lot of do-re-mi out there to be made. Yeah. And so that will keep the wheels moving. I mean, you look at these TV contracts, they're huge. And now the product's always going to be there. It's the message is in the medium. You know, how are we going to get this to people? We still have another, I think, 15 years of linear stuff just coming at people, you know, and then I'm lucky enough to be a part of both the linear stuff and some of the streaming arm of ESPN with ESPN Plus. I mean, you look at the roster of games that are available. It's awesome.
Yeah. And you'll have a front row seat for it, Pete. And that's what I want to peel the curtain back for your Saturday or your basketball game day and what that looks like for you and your preparation, because it's not every day that a podcast listener gets the front row seat into the backstage of ESPN right here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Pete. ESPN Saturday. Yeah, I know you'll really you've got the taste of it now, and this year you'll get the full, like, everything being on contract.
Yeah.
What is that? You just hear that ESPN Saturday. What is that? What does that bring to mind?
Well, butterflies. I think it's for all of us. I think if you don't have that little bit of tension and stress and butterflies in your stomach, the pilot light isn't on. I mean, you talk to the best players of all time. You talk to fans. You talk to media members. I mean, wow. Week one, I'm at Baylor. You know, September 2nd, here it is. Texas State comes in to Waco to play Baylor, and it's just everybody's 0-0. Yeah. You know, there's something about that is just so powerful. And so the first thing I think of when you say game day, I think butterflies. You wake up in the morning, and it's like all this anticipation and excitement, but there's also butterflies. It's that big a deal.
Pete, what is it behind the scenes? So I have been blessed enough to at least see how you guys operate. Yeah. But for a general fan, and to me, even in seeing it the first couple times, I thought, oh, that's not what I thought it was like. Yeah. There is there's the view the fans get on the TV at home, and then there's what it actually is for you in the booth. What do you think is misconstrued, misunderstood, or almost the TV magic that goes into it that a viewer might not understand?
Well, preparation is massive for football. I'm lucky because I played football. Yeah. I worked in public relations in the NBA, and I wrote game notes for years. I'm a stats nerd, I know how to find stats. The guy who I'm doing the game with is LaDarren McClain. Right now, I can tell you that LaDarren played at North Texas, and I can't wait to ask him about in 1999 when North Texas beat Texas Tech on the road in week 2 of the season. What's that like going into an environment like that? How does Texas State pull off this upset against Baylor? That's a nugget that I thought, I wonder if one of his North Texas teams upset somebody. They did. And so now I get to, so that's kind of like, that's in my wheelhouse. As far as game day is, so the preparation is crazy though. I mean, there's so many players. I've literally seen very good broadcasters, very good, back away from doing football games because they said, it's just not worth it for me.
Wow.
I have an NBA contract. I've seen that happen. And that's the truth, Sarah. And they'll tell you, look, man, you're doing a college football game and there's a lot that can go wrong, but there's a lot that can go right. And some of the things that go right, you have so much assistance up there in the booth. I mentioned being a PR guy. When I was a PR guy, I got to travel. I worked specifically in the NBA, but I did travel with a couple NFL broadcasters and college broadcasters, and I did spotting for them. And for people that don't know, broadcasters have boards. I'll get my board here for the Baylor game. Usually you get them the Monday or Tuesday of game week. Yeah. And I've already done a ton of research, handwritten notes, found out all those little nuggets I just told you about, my broadcast partner and players all over on both teams. But game day, when the action starts, I have a guy next to me who will point at the board. Okay, this guy made the catch. This guy made the tackle. And then there's another guy who's telling me how many yards, a catch was, and any exotic nuggets. The reason I say that is I don't know if some broadcasters shy away from revealing that, but I used to do both of those jobs. And I know there's a lot of stress and they're thankless. So it's certainly worth bringing up and taking people behind the curtain because there's a lot that goes into it. Because on a play, I'm talking to the analyst, the producer saying something. I watch every play and I see every last thing that happens, but it doesn't hurt to have somebody there, that can help me with the bang, bang stuff. And I will say too, when I'm really prepared, that spotter's incredible to have for a block punt and who recovered it. But at the same time, you don't need him that much.
Yeah.
I know that both teams so well, the bodies of the players. If a guy climbs the ladder for a catch and his number's obstructed, well, I've got a pretty good feeling that's Jordan Neighbors. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's kind of how that works.
I love it. Pete, before we get you out of here, you mentioned butterflies already. You mentioned stress, too. You get in the booth at McLean Stadium on September 2nd. Headset goes on. You're 30 seconds out from being live. What's the gut feeling? What are there nerves there, or are you just doing your job?
Well, I used to think of last year I thought of my dad because he passed away. This year, my brother passed away in the offseason, and you sent me such a nice note. He died from cancer, my brother Kevin. It's just 52 years old. I can guarantee you I'll be thinking of him, and I'll be asking those guys and the help of the higher power, the big guy upstairs, to just speak through me. And let's have some fun. Let's have some fun. We are a medium for people to have fun. It's like, at that point, you're so prepared, and the game is going to happen before you. At 6 o'clock Central Time or 6:02 or whatever, whether you're ready or I'm ready, they're going to kick off, dude. And it's time and I'll be ready. And I can guarantee you'll be ready too. And it's time to let's have some fun.
I love it. Pete, thank you again for being on the show today, peeling back the curtain a bit, giving your dark horses, and dude, any excuse that I can have to have you on the show and just to say, hey, is always worth it. This is for you to take time to do this. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, and go back at the end, be like Stat Boy on Around the Horn or PTI. Any clerical errors I made, make sure you help me out with them so I don't hear from all,
Perfect. Just in case Texas and Texas Tech don't play.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to need your help, all right? Because I love the Big 12 and I love all the fans, and I look forward to doing some football and then a lot of basketball.
Yeah. Well, Pete, folks are going to hear you on ESPN. Where can they find you on social media or anywhere else where you're posting podcasts or daily shows?
Yeah, I talked about one thing. You talked about my story. I've been sober for 12 years, or almost 12 years. I wouldn't be here without that. And, I had the gift of desperation, but I never thought I would be able to stop. I was that. I'm an addict. Now I live this. I'm talking to you. I'm just loving it. I try to wear life like a loose shirt. It's good. But if you feel like you can't stop drinking, just DM me, or you can't stop using it, whatever. I'm always here to help and talk people through it. I went to treatment. I lived in a recovery house. I worked at a KFC in the recovery house. I was in my 30s. This was after I worked in the NBA. So I learned a lot about life, second chances, and gratitude. And I got a podcast called The Payoff with Pete, and that's all about recovery. So if you want to find me there, go ahead. But again, any questions, any family members, yourself, DM me. I'd love to talk to you about any problems or struggles with addiction.
I love it. That's Pete Sousa from ESPN. Let's go. Come on. Next week, come back on Monday. Thanks for a great second week for all you listeners out there. Come back on Monday. We got a big guest lineup next week as well, getting you ready for kickoff. September's right around the corner, right here at Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Big 12.